Good morning. I want to apologize first. I'm really sick, so I'm struggling to get through the first 10 minutes of this. I'm going to hand it off to Paul, but I have my water and my cough drops and my tissues, so if I need them, I'm going to stop and use them so that you don't have to suffer through listening to me. I'm going to start just by giving you the context of the study we conducted. We started this study about 3-4 years ago now, the 2007-2008 school year, in a small district in rural Texas outside of Dallas, and we were looking specifically at the effects of a computer-assisted program that works on phonics-based reading skills with students in kindergarten, first, second grade. Our findings that we're presenting today are specific to kindergarten students in ELL classrooms, so ELL students who were enrolled in bilingual education. Just to give you some background information, some information about ELL students in the United States right now. Right now in our schools, we have students speaking over 400 different languages. So very often I know you think of ELL students and immediately people think of Spanish language students, their native language being Spanish. And it's not the case in some of the larger urban districts. Again, there's over 10.9 million students who are identified as English language learners, K through 12. And we're looking at statistics that point to in about 4 years, by 2015, that 30% of our students are going to be classified as English language learners, so students whose native language is not English. Although it is over 400 languages, Spanish is the majority of those students. Their native language is Spanish, so we are talking about 75% of ELL students are identifying Spanish as a native language, and in our study specifically, all of these students were Spanish language speaking students. An interesting fact, only right now about 2.5% of U.S. teachers actually have a degree or certification in ELL education. So, we'll come back to this at the end, but it does point to needing to find, in addition to providing certification programs and direct instruction for teachers in this area, finding support programs that will help in classroom instruction for teachers who may be faced with ELL students in their classroom and not necessarily prepared for it. And again, just as we know with students who are receiving reading education in their native language, for students who are ELL students, that big five, the phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension, are the key components of good reading instruction for ELL students. Some of the main challenges in schools for ELL students, first of all, if you just think about it, if you're working with ELL students or you can put yourself in that place, these are students who are being required to comprehend and speak in English, and it's not what they're required to comprehend and speak in at home. So there's a difference in expectation for the student. At the same time that they're required to do this in the school setting, they're also learning their basic reading skills. So very often these students come in with a mismatch in skill level. They may be able to produce this language but not necessarily decode it on the page. And again, they have to maintain a rate of progress in their reading that's consistent. We're expecting grade level progress from these students as they move through the grades, and that's consistent with what their native English speaking peers are doing, and yet they're starting much lower. So some key characteristics, and what we were looking at in the study is that students who are struggling to learn to read in English, who are not native English speakers, have very similar characteristics, very similar profiles to students who struggle to learn to read in English when it is their native language. One of them is weaknesses in phonological processing, so their awareness of sounds and words, their ability to rapidly name letters, and also their verbal working memory. And then also limitations in their oral language vocabulary and their grammar. So this is one that we're easily identifying. You know that students who come in who are not native English speakers don't necessarily have a word to match with every item that is in their reference vocabulary. So to switch gears, we kind of have the background on ELL students. If you think about using computer-assisted instruction, there are some really major tenets of computer-assisted instruction that are important to consider when you're putting it into a component of an experimental study. First, that it's systematic and structured, and so when we considered what we were using as CAI, we really wanted to make sure that this was a program that was presenting skills in a way that we could track the scope and sequence of the skill development so that students were moving through a developmental progress of skills just as they would be in classroom instruction. Another feature that is a great feature of computer-assisted instruction is that there's dynamic practice and unlimited repetition. So the task can change as the student responds. The computer can actually present scaffolded versions of a task if they struggle and give them additional chances to try and practice that task until they reach a level of mastery. Additionally, it's independent and individualized. So in a classroom setting, we could have students, especially students that were in a bilingual setting, who came in at very different levels, working all within one program, but working at different levels and moving at their own individualized pace. It was important, of course, with anything that you're putting into a classroom, that it was an engaging program, that students were motivated by the tasks, and they were involved, and they paid attention to what they were doing so that they had retention of the information. Computer-assisted instruction can be very intensive and consistent depending on how you deliver it. If it's implemented in a way that is structured in its use, then what the students are getting can be repetitive and intensive, and that consistent exposure gives them the practice that they need. And another interesting component of CAI is its flexible implementation, and so this was one of the things that we really took advantage of in this study. Because the students could use the program in a multitude of settings. They could use it in the computer lab, they could use the program in the classroom in small groups or in their center work, and they could use it before and after school in the library. We were able to, with the thresholds of use that we were putting in place for the study, make sure that all students were getting the access they needed, so we had a flexible implementation of the program for them. Specifically, the program we used was, it's a component program that has 3 components. These students were using early reading from Lexia Learning Systems and primary reading from Lexia Learning Systems. And so their early reading is a program with 2 levels. It works mainly on phonological awareness and sound symbol correspondence. And then students that completed that program transitioned into the primary reading program, which works on 1st to 3rd grade phonic word attack skills. So they're starting with segmenting and blending in early reading, moving into doing these skills with letters and the 6-syllable types in primary reading. A lot of what was implemented in the program is directly designed into the program is corrective feedback. So as the students are working independently, they're also getting information back about their performance so that they're hearing when they get correct answers, and when they're responding incorrectly, their answers are being corrected and they're given a chance to reapply that knowledge. And again, that's specific to some of the features of any CAI program that you're using, specifically Lexia Learning Systems programs. There is differentiated practice, so the students, the branching system in the program for the students, when they make mistakes, it can dynamically change the task to focus on the skills they're particularly struggling with. And again, that focused learning environment, so every student was working only on the skills that they needed to work on and moving at their own pace. They were focused on the task in front of them and not what was going on around them. I want to show you, before I transition this to Paul, just a couple of screens and point out some features of the program. First, a screen from an activity in early reading. So this is the program specifically designed for pre-K and kindergarten students. And this is a segmenting task, so anyone who's familiar with reading instruction, this is the Elkinen bars that you pull down 1 bar for each sound that you hear. A really simple, focused screen for the student, not a lot going on. The lion is Lexi the lion. He provided the modeling and the feedback for the student. And then as they work, there is some reinforcement given to them where they can actually self-monitor their progress. They see the balloons counting up as they complete the tasks. There was, and one of the features that was utilized a lot in this program for these students in this experiment, was that button in the top left-hand corner, which is a repeat button. Students were trained by us and then by their teachers as well to use that button to ensure that they had fidelity of what they were hearing before they were responding. And then another task, just to show some of the development of skill throughout the program that the students were able to work on. As they completed activities and levels, they moved to more complex activities. This is an activity from a higher level of the primary reading program that works on phoneme manipulation. So a chaining activity where students asked to change the word tent to the word scent by substituting a letter, and then also work on additions and deletions. Here you can see they changed sand to stand by adding the T in. So.
All right, thank you so much, Alyson. Okay, my job is to tell you a little bit about the research study itself. And before that, I'd like to just talk briefly about what research has shown about effective programs and classroom programs for working with students who who are English language learners, a little bit on that. And then I'll talk a little bit about research on CAI for early reading. And then I'll talk about the specific study that we did with our ELL students. First of all, in a summary article by Shanahan and Beck, they point out that ELL students benefit from the same kinds of explicit instruction and phonological awareness and phonics that non-ELL students benefit from too. So it's very similar, the kinds of instruction they need. Sometimes it needs to be a little more rigorous, a little more intensive, but nonetheless the same kind of instruction. In fact, Sharon Vaughn et al. Did a study in 2006 where they provided very intensive instruction in small groups, daily activities, and phonological awareness and phonics and working on oral vocabulary and comprehension strategies, right? A gamut of abilities, working in small groups and showing that these kinds of intensive activities can benefit and lead to gains in reading skills in ELL students. Okay, that's intensive kind of work, small groups, sometimes one-on-one instruction. Now shifting briefly to what's been found in studies of computer-assisted instruction for non-ELL students. Most studies of CAI are with non-ELL students so far. And to look back, I picked a few examples in the literature of studies that have shown effects with non-ELL students, particularly kindergartners. And many of the studies look at-risk kindergartners, ones who come from, I'll say, poverty areas, and provide CAI training and show some benefits in early reading skills. And the two I picked here on this slide are from Waterford, studies using Waterford programs. And the first one by Hesh, I think, and Close, showing that phonological awareness training using Waterford programs led to gains in letter sound knowledge, phonological skills, and word reading, more so than control students who did not receive the CAI training. And a little later study by Cassidy and Smith, also working with kindergartners, showing greater gains in phonological awareness skills. And in their article, they talk about the importance of integrating the CAI programs with classroom instruction itself, so that the CAI is part of the instruction itself, and that's important. We emphasize that as well. Okay, and just to give you a preview of an example of a study that we did at Alexia a few years ago, using kindergartners and providing them with the opportunity to use early reading, the program for kindergartners mainly. And the study by Macaruso and Walker, we had a highly controlled study, which is available to us when you're working with AM and PM kindergarten classes. We were able to use match classes with the same teacher, assign one to the treatment group receiving computer-assisted instruction, and the other classroom taught by the same teacher was a control class. So they get the same curriculum, same teacher, everything the same except for CAI support in the treatment classes. And in that study we did, we were able to find, especially with early reading and its emphasis on phonological skills and phonological awareness, we were able to find stronger, higher phonological awareness abilities in the treatment students than the control students. And in many of the studies, as we found and others have found, the benefits are most pronounced when you look at the children who are the lower performers at pretest, those who struggle with some of these skills and can benefit mostly from the CAI support. Okay, let's take a look now at the current study and what we did. So we found that CAI support using Lexia has benefited kindergartners or non-ELL students, and we know that early reading, the Lexia's program, focuses on phonological awareness and phonics skills that are very valuable and important for ELL students to master. So we decided to try CAI support for ELL students. And we had classes in Ennis, Texas, outside of Dallas, as Alyson mentioned. They're bilingual education classes, taught mainly in English. However, instruction, if necessary, would include Spanish if children were struggling a great deal. So it's mainly in English, but Spanish if necessary. Okay, keep that in mind. And we had 4 classes that we worked with. We randomly assigned 2 of the classes to be treatment, 2 to be control classes. And they used a good phonics-based reading curriculum, McGraw-Hill, in the classes and supplemented with Saxon phonics and spelling. So they had a great deal of phonics work being done in the classroom as already. But we added to it we added to it the opportunity to use the CAI support. And in this case here, the children worked on early reading first, and then they moved on to primary reading, as Alyson mentioned, if they advanced beyond the activities in early reading. And support they used the CAI mainly in the laboratory, but classroom use was included too, especially for students who were absent and did not get a chance to go to the computer lab during lab time. They could use they could work on the activities in the classroom or at other locations like a library to make sure that they had enough use. It's critical that they have enough use. We suggested and urged 2 to 3 15 to 20 minute sessions a week for over a month period, so that we would get sufficient CAI use to show some effects. And we required at least 45 sessions to be included in the study. And because of some good monitoring of the students' use of the programs, both in the school setting itself, and because Alexia has the opportunity to monitor in a central database students' use of the program, how often they log on and use the program. So we kept track of it, and therefore we did not lose a lot of students to inadequate use. So we ended up with most of the students meeting our use requirement for this study. 29 treatment students compared to 37 control students. Okay, and the assessment tool that we use as a pre-test and a post-test is the grade test, the group reading assessment and diagnostic evaluation, the grade. And we use the kindergarten version level K, and it includes assessment of phonological awareness skills, matching sounds, rhyming abilities, early literacy skills, including phoneme graphing awareness, phoneme graphing correspondence knowledge, listening comprehensions included, and an extra word reading subtest. And that subtest we had, for that word reading subtest, initially for pretest, we used 10 items from the level K of the grade, and then we added some extra items to the post-test because of our earlier studies have shown that we can ceiling out on this particular subtest, and so we wanted to see some differentiation in students, so we added more items for a post-test. Okay, and overall, just to look at the results, overall, both groups started off around a similar level of ability on the total test scores on the grade, in the low end of the average range. And at the end of the study, a post-test at the end of the school year, the students using Lexia, the treatment group, showed a significant improvement from pre-test, and the control students stayed relatively the same. Okay, some slight improvement. Yes?
When did you give the pre-test?
When it was in the fall of the school year.
Like September or October or something?
Yes, October.
October?
Yeah. And then the post-test in May or so. Okay, and in particular, the differences between groups were most pronounced when we looked at the subtests involving phonological awareness, matching sounds and words and in rhyming abilities. That segment of the grade test, and that's where the differences were striking, which is consistent with the emphasis of the early reading program that they worked on. It works a great deal on phonological awareness skills, and we see those gains in that area. Okay, we also saw in this table some stronger improvements in word reading, identifying words that they see, stronger improvements for the treatment group relative to the control. Though in both cases, both groups did quite well, just that the improvement was a little bit stronger and significantly more so for the treatment group. Okay, to conclude the findings for the study, and we can see then that systematic and structured phonics-based computer-assisted instruction can benefit ELL students in helping develop their reading skills, as we see in the study. And the benefits for, in this case, with the programs we use, were in phonological awareness and in word recognition of word reading. Okay, and in this case, and in many studies, if you're implementing computer-assisted instruction in school systems, a lot of times the school systems that use it are school systems that have pretty effective curriculum to begin with. Right? They're the ones that recognize the value of CAI. So we're dealing with a comparison of CAI in classrooms where we have pretty strong instruction in the control classrooms. Right? So it's CAI over and above some good instruction in control classrooms. We've seen that. So we can even show benefits over and above some good instruction, which is remarkable. Okay, and then finally, as Alyson's mentioned, and she'll mention and talk about best practices in a moment, she has a moment left, is that using CAI can free up teachers to work with students individually, because others are working independently on the computer, right? Teachers can work more effectively, more rigorously, individually with ELL students, let's say, who need extra help. So the CAI is effective in that way for teacher efficiency. And finally, to finish up, Alyson's going to mention best practices in using CAI.
Sure.
You have
Thanks,
half
Paul.
a minute.
Half a minute. All right, we'll get this all in 30 seconds. But one of the interesting things about our studies is that in addition to the quantitative results, we always look at qualitative results as well through teacher surveys and through the work that we do with the teachers. So some of the interesting things that come out of this study and take away if you're working with ELL students in the classroom is first that a number of CAI programs, and specifically I'll mention the example in Lexia, but there's support in the programs that will scaffold the program for ELL students that are working on it. So specifically in Lexia, you can turn on the instructions, and as Paul mentioned, you can turn them on in either English or Spanish. As Paul mentioned, these classrooms were English-based instruction classrooms, but when Spanish was necessary to scaffold the student's learning, it was available. And so even when the student was working independently on the computer program, they could turn on just the directions in Spanish. All of the work and the instructional piece was done in English, but just the direction to the task was available in Spanish for them. Additionally, because of the heavy load on independent work with students, if ELL students are using CAI, it's important to look at programs that have immediate corrective feedback built in so that students aren't practicing these mistakes. It's really easy when you're working independently to get into a routine of, yes, this is what I think the answer is, so I'll just keep providing it even if it's wrong. The program we were working with at Lexia and many other CAI programs embed corrective feedback so the student receives information about their performance while they're working, not waiting to get that feedback to the student until after the task is completed. An interesting thing that came out of conversations with teachers was that it was a great opportunity to allow peer teaching to occur, so that when students were working in a lab or they were working in small groups or this was being done in centers, because the teacher was able to use this program in a way to structure small groups, she or he could be working with a small group of students, and if one ELL student was struggling, another student who may have completed that task or be stronger in that skill could assist the student in just getting through it and explaining maybe in a different way than the teacher would have done. Additionally, really important in what we saw was that you have to be able to establish consistent use patterns and monitor those use patterns. So as Paul said, we had the ability through the program to monitor off-site what was happening, but we found that the teachers were doing this in the classroom and tracking because they had to hit that 45 minutes a week to see the ability to make differentiation and gains on post-test. So I think really in the classroom, there's a multitude, and because of the flexibility of CAI, you can set it up in many different ways, as I mentioned, in a lab or in small groups and centers. But to have a set pattern so you know all students are getting access to this program is very important. And then most importantly is also provide opportunities, especially with ELL students, to transfer these skills off of the computer. Very often what they can do independently on the computer through scaffolded work is one thing. What they can then perform in the classroom or in real-world tasks may be different because it requires more independent work and more production work. So as long as the computer is, and Paula mentioned this, also integrated into the classroom curriculum and the program is part of other activities that are being worked on, the student then has the opportunity to reinforce these skills in real classroom work. So those are just a list of some of the things that came out of the study that can be applied in the classroom as well. And that's it. Sure. Do you have a question?
Yeah. You mentioned in the assessment that you used that you added 10 items to the post-test. Can you tell a little bit about the assessment? How did you add items?
Right, okay. What happened was we had done a previous study in which we gave the grade level K word reading test as a post-test. It turned out it has 10 items in the word reading subtest. And members of both the treatment group and control group ceiling on the test. So we could not find any differentiation. So we decided to be proactive, and we added 10 items from the level 1,
from the first grade level,
first grade level test of grade to the 10 original items from the second version of the kindergarten test. So we took 10 items from the first grade test and added on to the 10 items. So there'd be more word reading items so we can differentiate the groups.
The grade has a Form A and a Form B.
Right.
So you give Form A at the beginning of the year and B at the end. So we were able to use Form B of the kindergarten test plus the 10 items from the Form A of the first grade test.
Thanks, Alyson.
Okay. And then can you tell a little bit how, so you randomized the students, but were they all in the same class or?
It was random assignment of whole group classes just because of the way the school day works. and to get the access to the program, we had to assign whole classes to either treatment or control.
How many classes were?
4 classes, 2 treatment, 2 control.
Yeah. One quick question, follow up on that.
Yeah.
Obviously, with 2 a.m., 2 p.m., did you split them?
That was from a previous, the AM PM was from a previous study,
Okay.
and that was split.
Okay.
In this, we didn't have that luxury. We just had the 4 classes, so they were just randomly assigned.
Okay, and then one other question. I think it ended up the numbers were 29 and 37, so 8 got subtracted, I guess, for less. Or did they initially start out as the same number?
Yeah, roughly the same number, and
Okay.
we lost individuals because
Lack of usage, right?
that was the main one.
Transiency in the district. There were
Okay.
students who moved in and out of the
Didn't have
district.
post tests. That was the two main reasons.
And do you have any feeling on like what percentage of that might have had to do with their inability to take to the CAI, if you will? Nothing, zero.
I don't think so, just because.
I mean, would it reflect on the CAI?
Yeah, because the CAI use patterns were established whole group or whole classroom, it really was, if they got to it, it was because they were in class and there, and if they weren't, it was more about absence or
leaving or
those
not being.
factors, or not being in the district anymore.
Yes.
Promising results, thank you. On the grade, I'm not very familiar with that scale, and so one of the questions that I had was, you showed the bilingual group growing. If this had been a native group, or alternatively, if this were a classroom that you would say, wow, they had successfully learned these things, what would have been the score that you would have expected on the grade that would have said, these kids are not in trouble, these kids are going to be successful readers down the road?
What did we have with the kindergarten study? Was it scores of like 110, their standard scores, when we did it with native speakers?
At the end, it was roughly, well, let me back up. In our previous studies with kindergartners that we did using the grade, we had just worked with low performers. Okay, we had another study we actually didn't mention, a low performance study, and their scores, standard scores at pre-test, were around in the high 80s or so, 85 or so on average, and then moved up to around 100 standard scores. So it's the standard scores that we're looking at. In this case here, the pre-test standard scores on average were about low 90s, and then went up to about 103 or so on average, total test scores, which is a little bit above the average of 100. So it roughly is comparable to what we saw as benefits for the low performing kindergartners that we tested earlier. If we were not low performing kindergartners, then the scores would be a little bit higher than that on average, at least for the school districts that we've worked on, that we work with.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if you know kind of what, is there a score that predicts these kids are in good shape?
Yeah.
I know there's significance, I'm just trying to get at the meaningfulness of the...
Standard scores above 100 on average,
Yeah.
above average. I mean, so that's in a good range.
So 100 is the average? This
Yes,
is what's considered being on grade level, or
Right, with a standard
risk?
score, it's the range of kind of 90 to a 110 that's within the
And that's where they fell.
low average to high average.
Yeah, these were not, for example, we did not pick ELL, struggling ELL
Right.
students to do this study with. We picked ELL classes. And some of the students in the classes were, doing okay. And some were a little bit below. So 92 was the pre-test score. It's a little on the low end of average, really. Now, if we did struggling ELL students, that's a different story. We haven't done that yet. Yes?
You may have just answered my question, but all these students then were ELL students?
Yes.
The entire class, all 4 classes were
Yeah.
ELL at some level and varying degrees. So thank you for that clarification. And the second question is, this CAI program is built for teaching English reading. Maybe would you consider, teaching actually English? You're not really teaching English to these kids. You're teaching English reading skills. What impact may that have on the study? What considerations would need to be made thinking about the English portion of the actual language?
I think, as Paul mentioned before, the program is designed heavily to work on word attack, decoding skills. The program would have to include more components of expressive vocabulary and those kind of listening comprehension skills, and does not. I think there are other programs. I'm not familiar with the best programs that are available, but there are other programs, and a lot of that work is best done in classroom work as well.
Maybe one last question that stems from last night's keynote, where he was mentioning kind of the different, there's actually differences in the curriculum. You can see, there's some students perform better based on the curriculum. Mm-hmm. Have you guys done any comparisons between the different types? I think you mentioned Lexia is what you guys did the study with, and then there's the Waterford early reading. Have you compared the different types of curriculum to see what the results can be?
There aren't many studies that have done that. We haven't done any
No,
that
we-
do that. I'm aware of a recent study that was looking at some other programs more focused on fluency and comprehension. So it was comparing some programs in that area. But very often with commercially available programs, it's more comparing that program specifically to a control group and not across programs.
Right, just classroom instruction, not to other programs yet. That's along the way. That would, I mean, pitting different programs against each other is for the future. I think. I think just knowing the CI, regardless of which program it is, and showing that one or the other works well is fine. Relative to not having it in the classroom, that would be great. You know, comparing them, it's a little hard to do that, I think. Yeah. Good.
Did I get it right? The control group did relatively well on word recognition.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They had a really, as Paul
How do you
mentioned,
explain that?
they had excellent classroom instruction. So their school-based core curriculum was from McGraw-Hill, and they were also receiving Saxon phonics. So what we saw in gains for the control group was that there was a lot of focus on word reading skills.
Do you have any indication that they did it through improvement in PA? Because that's the way the experimental group.
Well, we don't. We actually had, our results in PA show that the control group didn't make significant gains on their phonological awareness scores. So that there was.
So some of the words that
So you could say that the experimental group got too much of PA training.
It's possible.
Sorry about that.
well, the words on the word reading list are both sight words and the decodable words. There's like half and half, and so if we did it, it's perhaps that the controlled children, did better on the sight words, for example, or the treatment kids benefited more from the program and helping to decode the decodable words. It could have been in that regard. We didn't look at that. I didn't look at that analysis.
You didn't split it up.
No, we didn't.
No.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sorry, one more question?
I have about 3 questions.
Oh.
Yeah, question 1, did the CAI students get more time in reading instruction than the control group students?
No, that's a good point. Because we used a lab-based model, while the students who were going into the lab using Lexia, at the same time there was another program available in the lab for students who were in control groups that was working on both math and reading skills. So they had free choice of working on a reading program or a
Right. It was free skills. It was
Sunburst key skills.
Sunburst key skills was free time, free computer time for the control children. It was unstructured. They pick some fun activity that you want to do, which is, by the way, the way computer activities are sometimes used in some classrooms. Free, have fun, do what you want. That's what we use as the control. That's what control kids are doing.
And the second question, and I won't go to the third, but the second question is: did you ever consider, and would you want to consider regular non-words?
That's
with regular
For testing them, yes. The programs do work on them. So the second program, primary reading, does have non-word availability. Like some of the activities do use non-words, but we didn't test for it.
Right. You want to test for their ability to decode.
Absolutely.
You could use non-words.
right. Well,
Yep.
the reason why we use
and words they haven't seen.
right the grade does not use non-words. The grade, and the reason we use the grade mainly is because it's a group administered test, and therefore it makes testing more efficient for us rather than individualized testing like the Woodcock-Johnson, where you'd have non-words and so forth. So those group tests, the ones we come across, don't have the non-words in them.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.